The evening shadows stretched long across the dusty ground of Marysville, California, as Delilah Vaughn frantically gathered the last of her laundry from the clothesline behind her modest cabin. The sudden autumn wind had kicked up without warning, bringing with it the unmistakable scent of rain. She cursed under her breath, fingers fumbling with wooden clothespins as the daylight rapidly faded around her. "Madam," a deep voice called from beyond the edge of her property, causing Delilah to start. "Pardon the intrusion, but you look like you could use some help." Squinting into the growing darkness, Delilah made out the silhouette of a man on horseback, his broad shoulders and cowboy hat unmistakable against the twilight sky of 1872. She instinctively took a step back, one hand clutching a damp sheet to her chest. "I mean no harm," the stranger said, dismounting with fluid grace that suggested years in the saddle. As he approached, she noticed he carried a lantern, its warm glow illuminating a face weathered by sun and wind, yet handsome in a rugged way. His eyes, kind beneath the brim of his hat, met hers with unexpected gentleness. "Samuel Irving," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "Just passing through when I saw you struggling in the dark." Delilah hesitated, measuring the stranger against her well-honed instincts. She had learned caution since arriving in Marysville 2 years ago, a widow with nothing but determination and skill as a seamstress to sustain her. "The rain's coming fast," he added, lifting the lantern higher. "Let me hold this while you gather your things." The first fat droplets began to fall, and practicality won over wariness. "Delilah Vaughn," she replied, reaching for another sheet. "I'd be grateful for the light, Mr. Irving." Samuel stepped closer, holding the lantern steady as Delilah worked quickly to pull down the remaining laundry. The warm circle of light surrounded them both, creating an unexpected moment of intimacy in the gathering storm. "You're new to these parts," Delilah observed, noting his lack of dust compared to most travelers who came through Marysville. "Just arrived yesterday," Samuel confirmed, adjusting the lantern to better illuminate her work. "Looking for ranch work. I've heard the Donovan spread might be hiring." Delilah nodded, knowing the place. Old man Donovan is always short-handed. His son left for San Francisco last spring, and he's been struggling since. A sudden gust of wind sent a pillowcase flapping wildly. Samuel caught it with one hand while steadying the lantern with the other, his reflexes impressively quick. "Thank you," Delilah said, adding the rescued item to her basket. "What brings you to California? You sound like you might be from back east." "Pennsylvania originally," Samuel replied, a hint of something wistful crossing his features. "After the war, I found it hard to settle. Been working my way west ever since." The rain began to fall in earnest, and Delilah grabbed the last shirt from the line. "That's everything," she announced, clutching her overflowing basket. "You're welcome to wait out the worst of this storm on my porch, Mr. Irving." Samuel nodded gratefully. "Much obliged, Mrs. Vaughn." "Miss," she corrected automatically, then felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cool rain. "I'm widowed." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or shared understanding. He simply nodded and followed her to the small cabin's covered porch, leading his horse to shelter beside it. As they stood listening to the rain pound the roof, an unexpected calm settled between them. Delilah found herself stealing glances at the tall cowboy, wondering what stories were written in the lines around his eyes and the set of his shoulders. What she couldn't possibly know was that this chance meeting, this simple act of holding a lantern in the darkness, would change the course of both their lives forever. The following morning dawned clear and bright, washing Marysville in golden light that belied the previous night's downpour. Delilah rose early as was her habit, stoking the fire in her small cook stove, before setting water to boil for her morning coffee. Her thoughts drifted to the stranger Samuel Irving and his unexpected assistance. He had departed once the rain slackened, tipping his hat with a quiet good evening. Miss Vaughn that had stayed with her through the night. She shook away the memory and focused on the day ahead. Tuesdays meant delivering finished dresswork to Mrs. Hamilton's general store and collecting new commissions. As Marysville's most reliable seamstress, Delilah had built a modest but steady business that kept food on her table, and a roof over her head no small accomplishment for a woman alone in the West. After breakfast, she gathered her completed work 3 mended shirts, a new calico dress for the banker's wife, and a set of handkerchiefs embroidered with delicate flowers. Placing them carefully in her delivery basket, Delilah secured her cabin and set off toward town. Marysville had grown considerably since gold was discovered in the nearby foothills in '49. What had once been little more than a trading post had transformed into a proper town with boardwalks, a school, several saloons, and even a small opera house that occasionally hosted traveling shows. The morning bustle had already begun as Delilah made her way down the main street, nodding greetings to familiar faces. "Morning, Miss Vaughn," called Mr. Peterson from his barber shop. "Fine day after that storm, isn't it?" "Indeed it is," she replied with a smile. "Your wife's dress is finished. I've just delivered it to Mrs. Hamilton's. She'll be pleased to hear it. Much obliged." As Delilah continued toward the general store, she caught sight of a familiar figure emerging from the town's only hotel. Samuel Irving stood on the boardwalk, speaking with Sheriff Matthews, his tall frame unmistakable even at a distance. He looked different in the daylight, less mysterious perhaps, but no less striking with his broad shoulders and the easy way he carried himself. She hesitated, unsure whether to acknowledge him or continue on her way. The decision was made for her when Samuel glanced up and spotted her. A smile of recognition crossed his face, and he excused himself from the sheriff, making his way toward her. "Miss Vaughn," he greeted, removing his hat. "I hope you weathered the storm without trouble." "Good morning, Mr. Irving," Delilah replied, suddenly conscious of her plain work dress and practical bonnet. "Yes, everything dried out nicely, thanks to your assistance." Samuel fell into step beside her as she continued toward the general store. "I spoke with Mr. Donovan this morning. Seems he does have work available after all." "That's fortunate," Delilah said, genuinely pleased for him. The Donovan Ranch was one of the better employers in the area, known for fair treatment of its hands. "Will you be staying in town, then?" "For now," Samuel confirmed. "Though Donovan offered a bunk in the ranch house once, I've proven myself useful." He glanced at her basket. "You're a seamstress." "I am," she acknowledged. "Not quite as romantic as the cowboy life, I'm afraid, but it suits me well enough." Samuel chuckled, a warm sound that sparked something unexpected in Delilah's chest. "There's precious little romance in mending fences and breaking horses, Miss Vaughn. Honest work is honest work." They reached the general store, and Delilah paused at the entrance. "Well, I wish you luck at Donovan's, Mr. Irving." "Samuel, please," he said, his eyes meeting hers with that same gentle intensity she'd noticed the previous night. "And might I call on you sometime, Miss Vaughn? Perhaps Sunday after church?" The question caught her off guard. It had been a long time since a man had shown interest in calling on her, after losing her husband to consumption back in St. Louis. Delilah had kept mostly to herself, focusing on building her new life. "Yes, that would be acceptable," she found herself saying, surprising even herself with the response. Samuel's smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Until Sunday, then." He replaced his hat and gave a slight bow before continuing down the street. Delilah watched him go. a curious mixture of anticipation and trepidation swirling within her. She had not planned on inviting anyone into her carefully ordered life, least of all a cowboy who might disappear with the changing seasons. Yet there was something about Samuel Irving that intrigued her, a steadiness behind his eyes that spoke of depth beyond his rugged exterior. Inside the general store, Mrs. Hamilton greeted her warmly. "Morning, Delilah. I see you've met our new arrival." The older woman's knowing smile suggested she'd observed their interaction through the store window. "Briefly," Delilah acknowledged, unpacking her basket of completed work. "He assisted me during the storm last night." "Did he now?" Mrs. Hamilton's eyebrows rose significantly. "Well, from what Sheriff Matthews says, he comes with good references. Fought for the Union, worked several reputable ranches between here and Colorado." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And unmarried, from what I gather." "Harriet," Delilah protested, using the older woman's first name as she did only when exasperated. "You're worse than a matchmaker." Mrs. Hamilton laughed, unrepentant. "A woman my age has to find entertainment somewhere, dear. Now let me see Mrs. Peterson's dress. She's been asking after it daily." As Delilah displayed her work and discussed new commissions, she couldn't help but wonder what Samuel Irving's story truly was. The war he'd mentioned had ended 7 years ago, yet he still seemed to be searching for something. Much like herself, perhaps. The week passed in its usual rhythm of work and routine, though Delilah found her thoughts straying to Sunday more often than she cared to admit. She told herself it was merely the novelty of social interaction beyond her usual circles, nothing more. On Friday afternoon, while pinning a pattern for Mrs. Judge Wilson's new dinner dress, a knock at her door pulled her from her concentration. Opening it revealed young Tommy Peterson, the barber's son, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Delivery for you, Miss Vaughn," the boy announced importantly. "From Mr. Irving out at Donovan's ranch. He gave me a whole dime to bring it straight away." Delilah accepted the package with a murmured thanks and a penny for Tommy's trouble. After closing the door, she carefully unwrapped the parcel to find a small carved wooden box. Inside, nestled on a scrap of soft cloth, lay a silver thimble. A note accompanied it, written in surprisingly elegant handwriting. "Miss Vaughn, I noticed yours was quite worn when we spoke. A seamstress deserves proper tools. Until Sunday. Respectfully, S. Irving." Delilah stared at the gift, touched by its thoughtfulness. Her thimble was indeed worn nearly through, but she'd been making do rather than spending precious money on a replacement. She slipped it onto her finger, a perfect fit. The gesture affected her more deeply than she would have expected. It wasn't an extravagant gift or frivolous token, but something useful, practical, something that showed he had noticed a small detail about her work, her life. Sunday couldn't come quickly enough. Samuel arrived promptly after the church service ended, dressed in clean clothes with his hair still damp from what was clearly a recent wash. He stood a head taller than most men gathered outside the white clapboard building, making him easy to spot as Delilah emerged with the other congregants. "Miss Vaughn," he greeted, removing his hat. "You look lovely today." Delilah smoothed the skirt of her best dress, a deep blue calico she'd sewn herself with carefully hoarded fabric. "Thank you, Mr. Irving, and thank you for the thimble. It was most thoughtful." "Samuel," he reminded her with a smile, "and you're welcome. I hope it serves you well." He offered his arm. "I thought we might walk to the Riverside Park if that suits you. The day is fine." She accepted his arm, aware of curious glances from townsfolk as they departed. Delilah Vaughn in the company of a gentleman was unusual enough to draw notice, particularly from the local gossips. "You'll have to forgive the attention," she said as they walked. Small towns thrive on new developments. Samuel chuckled. I'm well acquainted with small-town curiosity. And I imagine a woman of your independence is subject to more than her fair share of speculation. You might say that, Delilah acknowledged. A widow who chooses to remain unmarried is something of an anomaly here. Is that a choice, then? Samuel asked, his tone careful, not presumptuous. Delilah considered his question as they walked beneath the cottonwood trees that lined Marysville's Main Street. It has been, yes. After my husband died, I found an unexpected freedom in relying on myself alone. There's comfort in it, strange as that might sound. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Not strange at all. After the war, I found I preferred my own company for similar reasons. Answering to no one but yourself has its merits. They reached the small park that overlooked the Yuba River, finding a bench with a view of the water. The spring runoff had the river running high and fast, its surface glittering in the midday sun. How are you finding work at Donovan's? Delilah asked, genuinely curious about his new position. Honest work with fair pay, Samuel replied. Donovan's a good man, if a bit rough around the edges. Lost his wife some years back and hasn't quite recovered, from what the other hands say. He smiled slightly. We have that in common, I suppose, understanding what it means to continue on after loss. It changes you, Delilah agreed quietly, for better or worse. Both, I think, Samuel said, his gaze on the rushing water. I was a different man before Gettysburg. Delilah studied his profile, noting the faraway look that had entered his eyes. You were there. At Gettysburg, Samuel nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. Third day, Pickett's charge. I was with the 71st Pennsylvania at the angle in the stone wall. He fell silent for a moment. We held the line, but at terrible cost. Delilah didn't speak, allowing him the space to continue or not as he chose. Her own husband had been too ill to fight, but she had nursed wounded soldiers in St. Louis and seen firsthand the physical and invisible scars they carried. Afterward, I couldn't settle back into regular life, Samuel continued eventually. Tried farming my father's land in Pennsylvania, but the memories were too close. Started drifting west, working ranches following the seasons. He looked at her then, his expression clearing. Until I ended up in Marysville, holding a lantern for a determined woman hanging laundry in the dark. The way he said it with warmth and something like wonder made Delilah's heart beat a little faster. A fortuitous storm, it seems, she replied softly. Indeed it was, Samuel agreed. They spent the afternoon in pleasant conversation, discovering shared interests in literature and music. Samuel had received more education than most cowboys, having attended school through his 16th year before the war called him away. Delilah found his perspectives thoughtful, and his listening genuine, a rare quality in her experience. As the sun began its descent, Samuel walked her back to her cabin on the outskirts of town. At her door, he paused, hat in hand. I've enjoyed your company immensely, Miss Vaughn. Delilah, she offered, feeling the moment warranted the intimacy of her given name. And likewise, Samuel. Might I call on you again? He asked, his expression earnest. Perhaps next Sunday, or sooner if you would permit it. Delilah found herself nodding before she could overthink the wisdom of encouraging his attentions. I would like that very much. Samuel's smile was like sunrise. Until then, Delilah. He placed his hat back on his head, gave a slight bow, and departed, his stride easy as he headed back toward town. Delilah watched him go, a fluttering sensation in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Caution whispered that she was being reckless, opening herself to potential hurt. But another part of her, a part she had thought long dormant, urged her to embrace this unexpected connection. For the first time since arriving in Marysville, Delilah felt the walls she had carefully constructed around her heart begin to shift, ever so slightly. Over the following weeks, Samuel became a regular visitor at Delilah's cabin. He would arrive after his work at the Donovan Ranch, sometimes bearing small gifts, fresh eggs from the ranch chickens, wildflowers gathered along the trail, or books borrowed from Mr. Donovan's surprisingly extensive library. On Sundays, they would walk together after church, exploring Marysville's quieter corners or venturing along the riverbank. June arrived with unseasonable heat, the kind that made the air shimmer above the dusty streets and had everyone seeking shade by midday. Delilah was at her work table, windows thrown open in hopes of catching any stray breeze when a knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Samuel, his shirt damp with sweat, hat in hand. "I apologize for arriving unannounced," he said, "but Mr. Donovan has asked me to ride to Sacramento tomorrow for supplies. I'll be gone 3 days at least, and I wanted to see you before I left." "Come in," Delilah invited, touched by his consideration. "You must be parched in this heat. Let me pour you some lemonade." Samuel stepped inside gratefully, ducking his head beneath the low doorframe. He had never been inside her home before. Their interactions had always taken place on the porch or in public settings as propriety demanded. But the oppressive heat made exceptions necessary, and Delilah found she didn't mind his presence in her private space. Her cabin was small but meticulously kept. One main room served as kitchen, dining, and living area, with her work table positioned near the largest window. A curtain partially concealed her sleeping area in the corner. Simple, functional furnishings reflected her practical nature, while small touches, a vase of wildflowers, carefully arranged books, a colorful quilt revealed her aesthetic sensibilities. Samuel accepted the glass of lemonade she offered, drinking deeply. "Thank you," he said with genuine gratitude. "Donovan had us moving cattle to the upper pastures all day. This heat's unusual for June." "So everyone keeps saying," Delilah agreed, taking a seat across from him at her small table. "Mrs. Hamilton claims it portends an early winter." "Old ranch hands say the same," Samuel smiled. "Though I've noticed weather predictions are more often wrong than right." They fell into comfortable conversation, the kind that flowed easily between them now. As the afternoon waned, Samuel helped Delilah bring in laundry that had dried in record time under the blistering sun. "Reminds me of how we met," he commented, holding a sheet as she folded it with practiced efficiency. "Though considerably brighter conditions." "And less dramatic," Delilah added with a smile. "No dashing rescue required today." Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, I've been meaning to ask, why were you hanging laundry so late that evening? Most folks would have waited until morning." Delilah's hand stilled momentarily on the fabric. "I had been nursing Mrs. Turner's youngest through a fever all day. By the time I returned home, darkness was falling, but I needed clean clothes for the next day." She resumed folding. "When you're alone, you do what needs doing, regardless of the hour." "You're a remarkable woman, Delilah Vaughn," Samuel said quietly. She looked up, caught by the intensity in his gaze. "I'm just practical. It's more than that." He set down the corner of the sheet he was holding and stepped closer to her. "You've built a life here on your own terms. You help others without complaint. You face each day with grace and determination. That's remarkable in my estimation." Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the weather. "You give me too much credit." "I don't think that's possible," Samuel replied, his voice low. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. "May I write to you while I'm in Sacramento?" The question was deceptively simple, yet they both recognized it for the significant step it represented. Letters were tangible things, evidence of growing attachment that couldn't be dismissed as mere friendliness. "Yes," Delilah answered, her fingers tightening around his. "I would like that very much." Samuel's smile warmed his entire face. With gentle deliberation, he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Until I return, then." The gesture, old-fashioned and courtly, sent a shiver through Delilah despite the heat. She walked him to the door, where they lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Safe travels," she said finally. "Keep an eye on those storm clouds," Samuel replied, nodding toward the horizon where dark shapes were gathering. "Looks like the heat might break before nightfall." After he departed, Delilah found herself touching the back of her hand where his lips had pressed, the sensation lingering like a promise. True to Samuel's prediction, a spectacular thunderstorm rolled through Marysville that evening, breaking the heat with dramatic flair. Delilah sat on her porch watching lightning illuminate the mountains to the east, thinking of Samuel and the journey he would begin at first light. His letter arrived 2 days later, delivered by a ranch hand passing through town on other business. Delilah's fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. "Dear Delilah," it began, his handwriting as elegant on the page as it had been on the note accompanying the thimble. "Sacramento is dusty and overcrowded, filled with men seeking fortunes or drowning sorrows. I find myself grateful for Donovan's detailed supply list, as it gives purpose to my presence here. Without it, I might simply turn around and ride straight back to Marysville, or more specifically, to your doorstep." The letter continued, describing his journey and observations with a thoughtfulness that revealed much about his character. He concluded with words that Delilah read multiple times, her heart quickening each time. "In the short months since that rainy evening when fate brought me to your clothesline, you have become the fixed point around which my thoughts revolve. I look forward to seeing your face again more than I can properly express in ink. Until then, I remain yours faithfully, Samuel. Yours faithfully." The phrase echoed in Delilah's mind as she carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her sewing box for safekeeping. She had not expected this turn in her carefully managed life, had not sought it, certainly. Yet here it was, a connection forming, a possibility opening before her like a flower to the sun. That evening, she sat down with paper and pen to compose her reply. Samuel returned 4 days later, riding into Marysville with wagons loaded with supplies for the Donovan ranch. Delilah, who had been watching the road with increasing frequency as his expected return date approached, spotted him from Mrs. Hamilton's store where she was delivering finished mending. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and Samuel's face brightened with a smile that sent a wave of warmth through her. He tipped his hat in greeting but continued with the wagons toward the ranch, duty before pleasure. Later that evening, as Delilah was preparing her simple supper, a knock at her door announced his arrival. She opened it to find Samuel, freshly washed and changed, holding a small parcel. "Welcome back," she greeted him, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "It's good to be back," he replied, his eyes conveying more than his words. "I brought you something from Sacramento." He extended the package toward her. Inside, Delilah discovered a beautiful bolt of emerald green silk, a rare and expensive fabric in these parts. "Samuel," she breathed, running her fingers over the lustrous material, "this is too generous." "I saw it and thought of your eyes," he said simply. The merchant was eager to bargain. I think his wife had tired of seeing it unsold. Delilah looked up at him, deeply touched. "Thank you. I shall make something special with it." "I received your letter," Samuel said, his expression growing serious. "Your words. They meant a great deal to me, Delilah." She had written honestly, perhaps more honestly than prudence dictated, about her growing feelings for him and her cautious hope for what might develop between them. To hear that her sentiments were well received filled her with quiet joy. "Would you care to stay for supper?" she invited impulsively. "It's simple fare, just rabbit stew, but there's plenty." "I'd be honored," Samuel accepted, stepping inside when she moved to admit him. They shared the meal at her small table, conversation flowing comfortably between them. Samuel spoke of his plans to save enough for a place of his own someday, while Delilah shared her hopes of expanding her seamstress work into a proper dressmaking shop. As dusk fell, Samuel helped her clear the dishes, their movements around the small space creating a domestic harmony that felt both novel and somehow right. When their hands brushed as she passed him a plate to dry, neither pulled away immediately. "Delilah," Samuel said softly, setting down the towel and turning to face her fully. "These past months have been the happiest I've known since before the war. Being with you brings me a peace I'd forgotten was possible." Delilah's heart raced at the earnestness in his expression. "I feel the same," she admitted. "You've brought unexpected joy into my life, Samuel." He stepped closer, his hands gently coming to rest at her waist. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice a whisper between them. Instead of answering with words, Delilah raised her face to his. Samuel's lips met hers with tender restraint, a first kiss that held both question and promise. When they parted, Delilah felt breathless in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "I should go," Samuel said reluctantly, though his hands remained at her waist. "Before I forget myself entirely." Delilah nodded, appreciating his respect for her reputation, even as part of her wished he might stay longer. "Will I see you Sunday? Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he assured her with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. That night, as Delilah prepared for bed, she found herself humming a tune she hadn't sung in years, a love song her mother had taught her long ago. The realization made her pause, one hand touching her lips where Samuel's kiss still seemed to linger. She was falling in love with Samuel Irving. Perhaps had already fallen. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Summer progressed with the steady heat typical of California's Central Valley. Samuel continued his work at the Donovan Ranch, earning the old man's respect with his diligence and skill with horses. Delilah's seamstress business thrived as Marysville's more affluent citizens commissioned new summer wardrobes. Their courtship for that was unmistakably what it had become, continued with increasing warmth. Sunday walks, shared meals, and evening conversations on Delilah's porch became cherished routines. Samuel proved himself a thoughtful suitor, respectful of Delilah's independence while making his growing affection clear. Late July brought the annual Marysville Founders' Day celebration, a two-day affair featuring a parade, contests, dancing, and feasting. The entire town participated, with ranchers and miners coming in from miles around to join the festivities. "Will you accompany me to the dance tomorrow evening?" Samuel asked Delilah as they walked back from church the Sunday before the celebration. "I would be delighted," she replied, already mentally reviewing her wardrobe for a suitable dress. Perhaps it was time to use the green silk he had gifted her. "Excellent," Samuel smiled. "I should warn you I'm not the most accomplished dancer. The war came before I had much chance to learn proper steps." "I'm certain you'll manage admirably," Delilah assured him, secretly pleased at the thought of being in his arms, even if only for the structure of a dance. That evening, after Samuel had taken his leave, Delilah retrieved the emerald silk from her fabric chest. She had been saving it for a special occasion, and the Founders' Day dance with Samuel seemed perfectly fitting. Working late into the night, She cut and pinned a pattern she had been designing in her mind since receiving the beautiful material. For the next 3 evenings, she sewed by lamplight after completing her regular commissions, creating a dress that would showcase both the exquisite fabric and her considerable skill. The style was fashionable but not ostentatious, with a modest neckline and sleeves that ended just below the elbow. The bodice fitted closely to her waist before the skirt flared gracefully over a simple petticoat. By Saturday afternoon, the dress was complete. Delilah dressed with particular care for the evening's festivities, arranging her chestnut hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical knot. A touch of rose water at her wrists and throat was her only perfume. When Samuel arrived to escort her to the town square, his reaction to her appearance was everything she could have hoped for. He stood momentarily speechless on her porch, his eyes taking in the vision she presented. "You look magnificent," he finally managed, the admiration in his gaze making Delilah feel more beautiful than she had in years. "That color suits you perfectly." "Thank you," she replied, pleased by his appreciation of her efforts. "You look quite handsome yourself." Indeed he did, dressed in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best trousers. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, transforming from rugged cowboy to gentlemanly escort. He offered his arm with a slight bow. "Shall we join the festivities, Miss Vaughn?" The town square had been transformed for the occasion. Paper lanterns hung from trees and temporary posts, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A wooden platform served as a stage for the small band of local musicians. Tables laden with food lined one side of the square, while benches offered resting places for those not inclined to dance. Their arrival together drew notice, though by now the town had grown accustomed to seeing Delilah and Samuel as a pair. Mrs. Hamilton approached immediately, her expression knowing. "Well, don't you two make a handsome couple," she declared. "Delilah, that dress is a triumph. I don't suppose you'd consider making something similar for my niece who's visiting next month." "I'd be happy to discuss it," Delilah agreed, accustomed to receiving commissions at social events. They circulated among the gathered townsfolk, stopping to chat with acquaintances and sample the abundant refreshments. Samuel kept a respectful hand at the small of Delilah's back, the gentle pressure a constant reminder of his presence. When the band struck up a lively tune, couples began to take to the dance floor. Samuel turned to Delilah, extending his hand. "May I have this dance?" "I promise to try not to step on your toes." She placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her to the center of the square. Despite his warnings about his dancing abilities, Samuel proved a competent partner, guiding her through the steps with more grace than many who claimed greater skill. "You dance quite well for a man who claimed little experience," Delilah remarked as they moved together. Samuel grinned. "I may have practiced a bit this past week. Old Mrs. Donovan took pity on me and offered some instruction." The image of Samuel earnestly practicing dance steps with his employer's elderly mother made Delilah laugh with delight. "That was very dedicated of you." "I didn't want to embarrass you," he said simply. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, alternating between lively reels and slower waltzes. During one such waltz, Samuel held her closer than strict propriety might allow, his cheek nearly touching her hair. "I've been meaning to speak with you about something important," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Delilah's heart quickened at his serious tone. "Oh, not here," Samuel clarified. "Perhaps later when there's more privacy." The mysterious comment lingered in Delilah's thoughts as they continued their evening. What could Samuel wish to discuss that required privacy? A flutter of anticipation rose within her at the possibilities. As the celebration began to wind down, Samuel suggested they take a walk toward the river, away from the dwindling crowd. The night was pleasantly cool after the day's heat, the sky ablaze with stars. They strolled in comfortable silence until they reached a small footbridge that spanned a narrow section of the Yuba. Samuel stopped midway across, turning to face Delilah. In the distance, the lanterns of the town square provided just enough light to see his expression serious yet filled with unmistakable tenderness. "Delilah," he began, taking both her hands in his, "these past months have been the happiest of my life. After years of wandering, I've found something I wasn't even sure existed anymore, a sense of belonging, of home." He took a deep breath. "That home isn't a place. It's wherever you are." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "Samuel, please, let me finish before my courage fails me," he requested gently. "I know we've known each other only a short time by some standards, but I believe some souls recognize each other instantly, while others might take a lifetime and never truly connect." With that, Samuel released her hands and reached into his vest pocket. He withdrew a small object and then, to Delilah's astonishment, lowered himself to one knee on the wooden planks of the bridge. "Delilah Vaughn," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" He opened his hand to reveal a ring, a delicate gold band with a small pearl at its center, simple yet elegant. It caught the distant lamplight and seemed to glow with its own inner fire. Delilah's breath caught in her throat. Though she had begun to hope their courtship might lead in this direction, the reality of Samuel's proposal here beneath the stars on this ordinary wooden bridge overwhelmed her with its perfect rightness. "Yes," she whispered, and then more strongly, "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features as he rose to his feet. With slightly trembling fingers, he slipped the ring onto her left hand, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. "It was my mother's," Samuel explained softly. "I wrote to my sister in Pennsylvania after I met you. Asked her to send it west, hoping I might find the courage to offer it to you. It's beautiful," Delilah said, admiring how the pearl gleamed against her skin. "Perfect." Samuel drew her into his arms then, his kiss conveying all the emotions words could not adequately express. Delilah responded in kind, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. When they eventually parted, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer yet," he said, "but I promise you this: I will work every day to be worthy of your trust and your love." "You already are," Delilah assured him. "We'll build our future together, day by day." They walked back toward town hand in hand, the weight of the ring on Delilah's finger a tangible reminder of the commitment they had just made to each other. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. As they reached Delilah's cabin, a sense of perfect contentment settled over her. The life she had carefully constructed for herself wasn't ending with this engagement, it was expanding, growing richer with Samuel by her side. She had feared that loving again might mean losing her hard-won independence, but Samuel's respect for her strengths and abilities had proven that fear unfounded. "When shall we marry?" Samuel asked as they stood on her porch, reluctant to part despite the late hour. "Soon," Delilah replied without hesitation. "I see no reason for a long engagement." Samuel's smile was radiant in the moonlight. "Nor do I. Next month I can speak with Reverend Hayes tomorrow." "Next month would be perfect," she agreed. After one more lingering kiss, Samuel finally took his leave, promising to return the following day to formally announce their engagement to her friends in town. Delilah stood on her porch watching his retreating figure until he disappeared from view. Then she looked down at the pearl ring glinting on her finger, tangible proof that sometimes life offered second chances at happiness when least expected. And it had all begun with a storm, a clothesline, and a cowboy holding a lantern in the darkness. The news of Delilah and Samuel's engagement spread through Marysville with the speed only a small town can achieve. By midday Sunday, Delilah found herself receiving congratulations from what seemed like half the population as she made her way to church. Mrs. Hamilton was particularly effusive, claiming partial credit for having sensed the potential from the beginning. "I couldn't be happier for you, my dear," the older woman said, clasping Delilah's hands warmly. "Mr. Irving is a fine man. Anyone with eyes can see how devoted he is to you." Samuel rode into town from the Donovan ranch in time for the service, sliding into the pew beside Delilah with a murmured apology for his near tardiness. Mr. Donovan had insisted on discussing future arrangements once Samuel had shared his news. "He's offered us use of the old foreman's cabin until we find a place of our own," Samuel whispered as Reverend Hayes began his sermon. "Says his previous foreman left for Oregon last year, and he's been using it for storage since." Delilah squeezed his hand in response, touched by the generous offer. The foreman's cabin, while not large, would provide them a proper start without the immediate pressure of building or purchasing a home. After the service, Reverend Hayes confirmed he would be pleased to perform their wedding ceremony on the third Saturday of August, just 4 weeks away. The short engagement raised a few eyebrows among the more conservative elements of Marysville society, but most understood that frontier life often necessitated practical timelines rather than extended courtships. The following weeks passed in a flurry of preparations. Delilah threw herself into creating her wedding dress, opting for a pale ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. In the evenings, she and Samuel would sit on her porch, planning their future together, while watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues. "I've been saving most of my wages," Samuel told her one such evening, 2 weeks before their wedding. "It's not a fortune, but enough to get us started properly, and Donovan has promised me a share of the fall drive profits." "My business has been prosperous this year as well," Delilah replied. "Between us, we'll manage quite well." Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. "Have you considered what you wish to do about your seamstress work after we're married? The foreman's cabin is too far from town for daily commuting." It was a question Delilah had been pondering herself. Her independent income had been crucial to her survival as a widow, and while she trusted Samuel implicitly, the thought of being entirely financially dependent on anyone gave her pause. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "Perhaps I could ride into town 2 or 3 days each week. Mrs. Hamilton has offered space in the back room of her store where I could work and meet with clients." Samuel nodded approvingly. "That sounds sensible, and once we have our own place, you might even set up a proper shop." His easy acceptance of her desire to continue her work reinforced Delilah's certainty that she had chosen wisely. Many men would expect their wives to abandon outside employment entirely, focusing solely on domestic duties. "You continue to surprise me, Samuel Irving," she said softly. "How so?" he asked, genuinely curious. Most men would assume their wives would give up any business upon marriage. Samuel's brow furrowed slightly. "That seems wasteful of talent. Your skill with a needle is remarkable. Why should marriage change that?" He took her hand, running his thumb over her calloused fingertips. "Besides, I fell in love with Delilah Vaughn the seamstress, not some imaginary version of you." Delilah leaned over and kissed him softly, words inadequate to express her feelings in that moment. As their wedding day approached, Samuel spent increasing time preparing the foreman's cabin for their occupancy. With Mr. Donovan's permission, he repaired the roof, replaced broken window glass, and constructed new shelving for Delilah's sewing supplies. He enlisted the help of fellow ranch hands to move out the accumulated storage items and thoroughly clean the modest two-room structure. The day before their wedding, Delilah visited the cabin for the first time, riding out to the Donovan ranch with Mrs. Hamilton as chaperone. The older woman had insisted on propriety, even as she winked conspiratorially at Delilah's amused expression. Samuel was waiting for them, pride evident in his stance as he helped Delilah down from her borrowed horse. "It's not much," he cautioned as he led her toward the cabin, "but I've tried to make it comfortable." Delilah was touched by the obvious care he had invested in their future home. The main room had been whitewashed to brightness, its plank floor scrubbed clean. A small cookstove gleamed in one corner, clearly recently blackened and polished. Simple curtains purchased from Mrs. Hamilton's store, Delilah suspected hung at the windows. "Come see the bedroom," Samuel urged, leading her to the second, smaller room. There, centered against one wall, stood a beautifully crafted bed frame with a new straw mattress covered by a colorful quilt. A small chest of drawers and a washstand completed the furnishings. "The bed frame is new," Samuel explained. "I traded some work with the carpenter in town." "It's beautiful," Delilah said sincerely, running her hand along the smooth wooden post. "Everything is perfect, Samuel." Mrs. Hamilton, who had been inspecting the kitchen area with a critical eye, rejoined them. "Well, it's certainly cozy," she pronounced, which from her was high praise indeed. "Though you'll need more cookware than that single pot I spotted, Delilah." "We'll acquire things as we need them," Samuel responded easily. "Rome wasn't built in a day, Mrs. Hamilton." The woman laughed, her initial reservations about Samuel long since overcome by his evident devotion to Delilah. "Very true, Mr. Irving, very true indeed." That evening, Delilah's closest friends in Marysville gathered at Mrs. Hamilton's home for a small celebration in her honor. As a widow rather than a first-time bride, the occasion was more subdued than a traditional bridal shower, but no less meaningful for that. "A gift from all of us," Mrs. Hamilton announced, presenting Delilah with a large basket. Inside, she found an assortment of practical household items, linens, kitchen utensils, candles, and other necessities for establishing a new home. "Thank you all," Delilah said, genuinely moved by their thoughtfulness. "Your friendship has meant everything to me since I came to Marysville." Mrs. Turner, whose child Delilah had nursed through fever the night she met Samuel, pressed a small package into her hands. "This is just from me," she said quietly. "A small repayment for your kindness to my Thomas." Inside the wrapping, Delilah found a beautiful set of 6 bone china teacups with matching saucers, a true luxury in a frontier town. "These are far too fine," Delilah protested, knowing the Turner family's modest circumstances. "Nonsense," Mrs. Turner replied firmly. "They were my grandmother's, and I've been saving them for a worthy purpose. Your happiness with Mr. Irving is certainly that." As Delilah returned to her cabin for her final night as an unmarried woman, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the community that had embraced her after her arrival as a grieving widow. Tomorrow, she would begin a new chapter, not alone this time, but with Samuel by her side. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of late summer flowers. Delilah woke early, her stomach fluttering with anticipation rather than nervousness. She bathed carefully, washing her hair and allowing it to dry in the morning sun as she laid out her wedding clothes. Mrs. Hamilton arrived mid-morning to help with preparations, bringing with her a small bouquet of wildflowers and garden roses. "Something borrowed," she declared, pinning a delicate cameo brooch to Delilah's bodice. "It was my mother's." By early afternoon, Delilah stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, barely recognizing the radiant woman who gazed back at her. The ivory silk dress fell in graceful lines from her slender waist, its subtle embroidery catching the light as she moved. Her chestnut hair was arranged in loose curls, adorned with tiny white flowers. "You look beautiful, my dear," Mrs. Hamilton said softly from the doorway. "Absolutely beautiful." "Thank you," Delilah replied, smoothing her skirt one final time. "I'm ready." They walked together to the church, where a small gathering of friends and acquaintances awaited. Marysville weddings were community affairs, with even casual acquaintances attending to wish the couple well. As Delilah paused at the church entrance, she caught her first glimpse of Samuel standing beside Reverend Hayes at the altar. He wore a new dark suit purchased in Sacramento, she suspected, and had trimmed his beard to neat precision. But it was the expression on his face as he turned and saw her that Delilah would remember forever, a look of such profound joy and reverence that it brought tears to her eyes. The ceremony itself passed in something of a blur, though Delilah would later recall the warmth of Samuel's hands holding hers and the steady certainty in his voice as he repeated his vows. When Reverend Hayes pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel's kiss was tender yet filled with promise. A celebration followed at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes, and a small band played cheerful tunes for dancing. Samuel kept Delilah close throughout, his hand rarely leaving the small of her back as they accepted congratulations and well wishes. As evening approached, they prepared to depart for their new home at the Donovan Ranch. Friends gathered outside to see them off, showering them with rice and good-natured teasing. "Ready, Mrs. Irving?" Samuel asked quietly as he helped her onto their wagon. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through Delilah. "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze with a smile. "Very ready." The ride to the Donovan Ranch was peaceful, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and amber. Samuel pointed out landmarks along the way, helping Delilah orient herself to what would now be her daily surroundings. "There's a stand of wild blackberries just beyond that ridge," he noted. "They should be ripening soon, and that creek never runs dry, even in August." Delilah listened, absorbing these details of her new home, her hand resting contentedly on Samuel's arm. When they arrived at the foreman's cabin, Samuel surprised her by gathering her into his arms before she could descend from the wagon. "Tradition demands I carry you across the threshold," he explained with a grin. "Far be it from me to argue with tradition," Delilah laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he lifted her effortlessly. Inside, she discovered Samuel had prepared one final surprise. The cabin was illuminated by dozens of candles, their warm light creating a golden glow throughout the small space. On the table sat a bottle of wine, a rare luxury, and 2 glasses. "When did you arrange this?" Delilah asked in wonder as Samuel set her gently on her feet. "I had some help," he admitted. "Donovan's housekeeper has a romantic streak beneath that stern exterior." Samuel poured wine for them both, then raised his glass in toast. "To my beautiful wife, who captured my heart while hanging laundry in the dark." Delilah touched her glass to his. "And to my husband, who held the lantern when I needed it most." Later, as they lay together in their new bed, the connection between them deepening in ways both physical and spiritual, Delilah marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. A storm, a chance encounter, a simple act of kindness, these ordinary events had altered the course of their lives, bringing them to this extraordinary happiness. As Samuel drew her close, whispering words of love against her skin, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last, not in a place, but in the arms of the man who had once held a lantern for her in the darkness. The first months of marriage passed in a sweet blur for Delilah and Samuel. They established routines that honored both their individual needs and their shared life. 3 days each week, Delilah rode into Marysville to work in the back room of Mrs. Hamilton's store, maintaining her seamstress business while building a new client base among the outlying ranches near her new home. Samuel's days were filled with the demanding work of the Donovan Ranch, but evenings belonged to them alone. Their small cabin became a warm haven, gradually filled with touches that reflected their combined tastes: Samuel's books alongside Delilah's sewing materials, wildflowers in jars on the windowsills, a braided rug before the hearth that Delilah crafted during the long autumn evenings. They learned the rhythms of shared life: when to speak, when to offer silent companionship, how to navigate the minor disagreements that inevitably arose. By late November, as the first chill of winter settled over the valley, Delilah confirmed what she had begun to suspect in recent weeks: she was with child. She shared the news with Samuel on a quiet Sunday morning as they lingered over breakfast in their cozy kitchen. "A baby," Samuel whispered, his expression transforming from surprise to wonder. He rose from his chair and knelt beside hers, placing a gentle hand over her still flat stomach. "When? Late spring, I believe," Delilah replied, covering his hand with her own. "May or early June." Samuel looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Are you happy about this?" "Truly, I am," Delilah assured him, touched by his concern for her feelings. "Though I confess to some nerves, it's been a long time since I imagined myself as a mother." Samuel pressed a kiss to her palm. "You will be wonderful, and we will figure it out together, as we have everything else." As winter deepened, Samuel worked with renewed purpose, taking on extra duties at the ranch to earn additional money for their growing family. With Mr. Donovan's blessing, he began breaking and training horses from the wild herds that roamed the valley, a dangerous but lucrative skill at which he excelled. Delilah watched his dedication with a mixture of pride and concern, aware of the risks involved with wild horses. Yet she understood his drive to provide, to build security for their child's future. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she urged one evening as she tended a bruise on his shoulder, the result of a particularly spirited young stallion's resistance. "Always," Samuel assured her, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her wrist. "I have too much to live for to be reckless." Christmas brought their first major celebration as a married couple. They decorated their cabin with pine boughs and red berries gathered from the surrounding countryside. Samuel surprised Delilah with a rocking chair he had commissioned from the town carpenter, a place for her to rest and eventually nurse their baby. "It's perfect," Delilah exclaimed, running her hands over the smooth wooden arms. Her gift to him was more practical: a new pair of leather riding gloves she had crafted herself, meticulously stitched with his initials. They attended the Christmas service at the Marysville church, receiving warm greetings from friends and acquaintances. News of Delilah's pregnancy had spread, bringing congratulations and knowing smiles. "Motherhood suits you already," Mrs. Hamilton declared, noting the healthy glow in Delilah's cheeks. "You're positively radiant." As January brought heavy rains that turned the countryside to mud, Delilah's body continued its transformation. Her dresses required adjustment, and she found herself tiring more easily than before. Samuel was attentive without being overbearing, taking on additional household duties without comment when he saw her energy flagging. One stormy evening, As wind lashed at their snug cabin and rain drummed on the roof, Delilah sat in her rocking chair mending one of Samuel's shirts. He sat nearby, reading aloud from a volume of Emerson's essays, one of the books he treasured from his Eastern education. During a pause in his reading, Delilah looked up to find Samuel watching her, his expression thoughtful. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking about the night we met," he replied. "Another storm, not unlike this one, you hanging laundry in the darkness." Delilah smiled at the memory. "And you appearing like an apparition with your lantern." "I almost didn't stop," Samuel admitted quietly. "I was tired, focused on reaching town before the worst of the rain hit, but something about the sight of you there, so determined despite the coming storm." He shook his head slightly. "I couldn't ride past." "I'm very glad you didn't," Delilah said, setting aside her mending to cross to him. She settled onto his lap, her growing belly between them. "Though I was rather suspicious of your motives, if you recall." Samuel chuckled, his hand coming to rest on the curve of her stomach. "Rightfully so. A woman alone had every reason for caution." His expression grew more serious. "I hope our child never knows such uncertainty. Boy or girl, I want them to grow up feeling secure, protected." "They will," Delilah assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. "With you as their father, how could they not?" As February turned to March, bringing the first hints of spring to the valley, Delilah and Samuel began discussing names for their child. They sat on their small porch in the lengthening evening light, a quilt wrapped around them against the lingering chill. "If it's a boy, perhaps William." "After my father," Samuel suggested. "William Irving," Delilah tested the name. "It has a nice sound, and for a girl," Samuel looked thoughtful. "What was your mother's name?" "Elizabeth," Delilah replied, though everyone called her Lizzie. "Elizabeth Irving," Samuel nodded approvingly. "Beautiful, like her mother will be." Delilah smiled, leaning into his side. "So William or Elizabeth it shall be." Their contentment was interrupted in early April when Mr. Donovan suffered a fall from his horse, breaking his leg badly. The accident thrust additional responsibility onto Samuel as the most experienced hand on the ranch. "Donovan's asked me to take over as foreman, at least until he's back on his feet," Samuel told Delilah over dinner the evening after the accident. "It means longer hours, more responsibility." "But also more pay, I imagine," Delilah observed practically. Samuel nodded. "Considerably more. He's even mentioned the possibility of a partnership eventually. He has no son to inherit, and his daughter in San Francisco has no interest in ranching." The news was both exciting and daunting. A partnership in the Donovan ranch would provide the security they had been working toward, but the increased demands on Samuel's time came just as they were preparing for their child's arrival. "We'll manage," Delilah assured him, seeing the conflict in his expression. "This opportunity is too important to refuse." April showers gave way to May sunshine, and Delilah's time grew near. Her trips to town had ceased as her pregnancy advanced, but Mrs. Hamilton visited regularly, bringing supplies and companionship. Samuel arranged for the ranch cook's wife, Mrs. Mendoza, to check on Delilah during the days when his duties took him to the far reaches of the property. "The baby has dropped," Mrs. Mendoza informed Delilah during one such visit in mid-May, her experienced eyes noting the change in Delilah's shape. "Not long now, I think. A week, perhaps 2." Delilah nodded, both eager and anxious for the impending birth. She had arranged for Mrs. Turner, who had assisted at many Marysville births, to attend her when the time came. Samuel had hired one of the younger ranch hands to stay ready as a messenger, prepared to ride for Mrs. Turner at the first sign of labor. The morning of May 23rd dawned clear and warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers through the open cabin window. Delilah woke early, aware of a persistent ache in her lower back. She moved carefully, not wanting to wake Samuel, who had returned late from supervising a night calving. By mid-morning, the intermittent pains had developed a recognizable pattern. Delilah sent word with Mrs. Mendoza, who arrived for her daily visit, to alert the messenger. Samuel was checking fence lines in the north pasture, but had left instructions to be found immediately when Delilah's time came. Mrs. Turner arrived shortly after noon, her calm presence immediately reassuring. "First babies often take their time, dear," she advised, helping Delilah walk slowly around the cabin to ease her discomfort. "Try not to worry." Samuel burst through the door less than an hour later, his face flushed from hard riding. "Delilah," he breathed, crossing to her side where she leaned against the table during a contraction. "I came as quickly as I could." "You're here now," she said, reaching for his hand as the pain subsided. "That's what matters, Mrs." Turner shooed Samuel outside as the afternoon progressed and Delilah's labor intensified. "Husbands underfoot are no help at all," she declared firmly. "Mrs. Mendoza will keep you company on the porch." The hours blurred for Delilah as she worked to bring their child into the world. Pain, rest, encouragement from Mrs. Turner. Pain again. The cycle continued as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Finally, as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight, a new sound filled the small cabin, the indignant cry of a newborn taking their first breath. "A boy," Mrs. Turner announced triumphantly, quickly wiping the squalling infant before placing him on Delilah's chest. "A fine, strong son." Delilah gazed down at the tiny red face, overwhelmed by a surge of love so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "William," she whispered, tracing a finger along his perfect cheek. "Hello, my William." Mrs. Turner opened the cabin door where Samuel had been pacing for hours. "Mr. Irving," she called with a broad smile, "come meet your son." Samuel entered cautiously, his expression a mixture of concern for Delilah and awe at the tiny bundle in her arms. "A boy?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "William Irving," Delilah confirmed, lifting her gaze to meet his. 8 fingers, 8 toes, and perfectly handsome like his father. Samuel sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out a tentative hand to touch the downy head of his son. "He's so small," he marveled, "but with a healthy pair of lungs." Mrs. Turner chuckled as the baby gave another indignant cry. "I'll leave you 3 to get acquainted while I clean up." When they were relatively alone, Samuel leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to Delilah's forehead. "You are amazing," he whispered. "Absolutely amazing." Delilah smiled tiredly. "We did this together, you and I." "No," Samuel shook his head firmly. "You did the hard part, the miraculous part." He gazed down at their son with wonder. "I never imagined I could love anyone as much as I love you, but now your heart has expanded," Delilah finished for him, understanding exactly what he meant. "To make room for him too." Samuel nodded, unable to find adequate words for the emotions overwhelming him. Instead, he carefully gathered both wife and son into his embrace, creating a circle of love in the quiet room as night fell fully outside their window. William, Billy, Irving proved to be a robust baby with a healthy appetite and a surprisingly sunny disposition. Delilah adapted to motherhood with the same practical determination she brought to all challenges, though there were moments when the combination of physical recovery, interrupted sleep, and constant demands left her feeling overwhelmed. Samuel was an enthusiastic father, eager to participate in Billy's care in ways many men of the time would have considered beneath them. He would walk the floor with the fussing infant during night wakings, allowing Delilah precious hours of uninterrupted rest. On Sundays, He would take Billy for a man's mourning, carrying him around the ranch in a sling Delilah had fashioned, pointing out horses and cattle while Delilah enjoyed a leisurely breakfast and bath. Summer passed in a haze of adjustment to their new family dynamic. By August, they had settled into workable routines. Delilah had resumed limited seamstress work, with clients now coming to her at the cabin rather than requiring her presence in town. Samuel continued as acting foreman of the Donovan Ranch, earning both increased wages and the older man's deepening respect. "Donovan asked about my long-term plans today," Samuel mentioned one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset while Billy slept peacefully in Delilah's arms. "He's healing well, but says he's lost his taste for the day-to-day management of the ranch." "What did you tell him?" Delilah asked, already suspecting the direction of the conversation. "That I'm interested in putting down permanent roots," Samuel replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "He suggested I might consider buying into the ranch over time, starting with the parcel that includes this cabin and the adjacent grazing land." Delilah's eyes widened slightly. "That's a significant opportunity." "It would mean taking on debt," Samuel acknowledged. "But with careful management and your continued income from sewing, I believe we could make it work." He reached over to gently stroke Billy's cheek. It would be a legacy for him and any siblings who might come along. The mention of additional children brought a smile to Delilah's face. While Billy was still young, they had already discussed expanding their family when the time was right. "I think we should consider it seriously," she said. "Perhaps draw up some figures, see what kind of terms Mr. Donovan has in mind." Samuel nodded, clearly pleased by her supportive response. "I'll speak with him further tomorrow." By early autumn, the arrangements were formalized. Samuel and Delilah became the owners of 20 acres surrounding their cabin, with an option to purchase additional parcels as their means allowed. To celebrate, they hosted a small gathering for their closest friends from town and the ranch, marking both their new status as landowners and Billy's christening at the Marysville church. "To think, Mrs. Hamilton mused as she bounced young Billy on her knee during the celebration. "All of this because you were hanging laundry in the dark, and a certain cowboy happened by with a lantern." Delilah exchanged a warm glance with Samuel across the crowded cabin. "Providence works in mysterious ways," she replied softly. As winter approached once more, Samuel threw himself into improvements to their property. With help from fellow ranch hands, he expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for Billy and enlarging the main living area to accommodate Delilah's sewing work more comfortably. He constructed a small barn for their growing collection of livestock, a milk cow, chickens, and the mare Samuel had gifted Delilah for her birthday in October. December brought Billy's first Christmas, an occasion for special celebration. Though at 7 months, he was too young to understand the significance. His parents delighted in establishing traditions they hoped would continue throughout his childhood: a small tree, decorated with paper stars Delilah had cut and painted, special cookies baked from her mother's recipe, carols sung around the fireplace on Christmas Eve. "This time last year, we had just learned you were on the way," Samuel remarked as they watched Billy explore a wooden horse he had carved as a gift. "And now look at you, young man." Billy responded with a toothless grin, drool glistening on his chin as he gnawed contentedly on the toy's mane. His dark hair curled like his mother's, but the blue eyes that gazed up at them were unmistakably Samuel's. "He's perfect," Delilah said, leaning against Samuel's shoulder. "This whole life is. Not what I ever expected, but everything I could have wanted." Samuel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "And it's only just beginning." As the new year of 1874 dawned, their small family continued to thrive. Billy grew increasingly mobile, crawling with determined speed and pulling himself up on furniture to take tentative, wobbling steps while holding on. His vocabulary expanded from baby babble to include recognizable attempts at mama and dada. Each new accomplishment celebrated as though he were the first child ever to achieve such feats. In March, shortly before Billy's first birthday, Delilah confirmed she was expecting their second child. The news delighted Samuel, who swept her into a careful embrace when she told him. "Another miracle," he murmured against her hair. "Are you feeling well?" "Better than with Billy, actually," Delilah assured him, "though it's early days yet." They agreed to wait until the pregnancy was further along before sharing the news widely, though Mrs. Hamilton guessed almost immediately during her next visit, her sharp eyes noting the subtle changes in Delilah's appearance. "You're positively glowing again," the older woman observed with a knowing smile. "I suspect congratulations will be in order before the year is out." Delilah neither confirmed nor denied, but her blush was answer enough for Mrs. Hamilton, who merely patted her hand and launched into stories about her niece's new baby in Sacramento. Spring brought renewed activity to their expanding property. Samuel purchased an additional 10 acres adjoining their original parcel, including a year-round stream that would provide reliable water for livestock. With Mr. Donovan's blessing, he reduced his duties at the main ranch to focus more on developing their own holdings, though he maintained his position as foreman with adjusted responsibilities. Billy's first birthday in May was celebrated with a small gathering of friends. The toddler, now walking with increasing confidence, charmed everyone with his sunny smiles and curious nature. Watching him toddle between Samuel and Mrs. Turner, accepting cookies from both with equal enthusiasm, Delilah felt a deep contentment that transcended her occasional discomfort from her advancing pregnancy. By late summer, their future plans had crystallized further. Samuel and Mr. Donovan formalized an agreement that would eventually transfer ownership of the eastern quarter of the Donovan ranch to the Irvings, a significant expansion that would allow them to establish a respectable cattle operation of their own. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible," Samuel admitted as they reviewed the signed papers one August evening. "When I rode into Marysville 2 years ago, I was just looking for seasonal work, somewhere to rest before moving on again. And instead you found a clothesline in the darkness," Delilah teased gently, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. "I found home," Samuel corrected, covering her hand with his. "In you and Billy in this life we're building together." The arrival of their daughter, Elizabeth Eliza Irving, in early November brought their family full circle. Born during a surprisingly mild autumn evening with Mrs. Turner again in attendance, the infant girl entered the world with less dramatic flair than her brother had, but with equally robust lungs. "She has your eyes," Samuel observed in wonder as he held his tiny daughter for the first time. "Same beautiful shape." Billy, now 18 months old, regarded his new sister with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty, not entirely convinced this small, noisy creature was a welcome addition. But with patient encouragement from both parents, he gradually accepted Eliza's presence, even allowing Samuel to guide his small hand to gently pat the baby's head. "Soft," Billy pronounced solemnly, one of his growing collection of words. "Yes, very soft," Samuel agreed. "You need to be gentle with your sister." Delilah watched the interaction with her heart so full it felt it might overflow. This family, her family, had grown from the most unexpected beginnings. A storm, a lantern, a simple act of kindness from a stranger who became the center of her world. As winter settled once more over their expanding homestead, the Irvings welcomed the new year of 1875 with quiet celebration. Their cabin, now a proper small house with the additions Samuel had built, was warm and bright against the January chill. Billy slept peacefully in his own bed, while baby Eliza dozed in the cradle beside their bed, her tiny features relaxed in slumber. Delilah and Samuel sat before the fireplace, a rare moment of tranquility between them as both children slumbered. "I've been thinking," Samuel said, his fingers laced with Delilah's, "about that night we met." "You seem to reflect on that often," Delilah observed with a smile. "Because it changed everything," Samuel replied simply. "One different choice if I had ridden past, if you had sent me on my way, and none of this would exist." He gestured to encompass their home, the evidence of their shared life together. "Perhaps fate would have found another way to bring us together," Delilah suggested. "I like to think some things are meant to be." Samuel raised her hand to his lips. "Then I am profoundly grateful that fate chose such a perfect beginning for our story, a determined woman hanging laundry in the dark, and a lonely cowboy with a lantern, finding unexpected light in each other." Delilah leaned into his embrace, her head resting on his shoulder as they gazed into the dancing flames. Outside, stars scattered across the vast California sky like diamonds on velvet, watching over the small house where love had built a home from the simplest of beginnings. Years would pass, children would grow, and the Irving homestead would expand into one of the most respected cattle operations in the region. But through all the changes, challenges, and triumphs that lay ahead, Delilah and Samuel would always remember how their story began with laundry in the darkness, a lantern's glow, and two hearts recognizing in each other the promise of home.